Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Bob Mendelsohn, and this is the Bob's Your Uncle podcast. Today we speak with Grace Tran from San Francisco, who talks about small groups and unpacking things and how you can learn with or without God. A great podcast. Stay tuned. Thanks for joining me for this Bob's Your Uncle podcast, Season 3, Episode 31. The opinions are strictly my own and those of my guests. I hope you enjoy the music. This is Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor. It's one of my favorites. You can now find us and comment to us wherever you get your podcasts. Tell us what matters to you, what triggers your joy, what bothers you in the world. Let us know. We'll see where the Spirit leads us. Whether you're at home, online, on the road with me in your headset at the gym, or out for your evening constitutional, wherever you get your podcast, that's where we will be. Thanks for being with us these 18 minutes.
But I do know that I love you, and I know that if you love me too, what a wonderful world this would be.
Historical marker of the week. On this date in history, 25 July in 1775, the United States Postal Service was established by the Second Continental Congress, and Ben Franklin was named the first Postmaster General. In 1898, United States forces under General Miles invaded Puerto Rico during the Spanish-American War. In 1956, the Italian passenger liner Andrea Doria sank after colliding with the Stockholm off the coast of Nantucket in the Atlantic Ocean. 51 people were killed. And on this date in history, 25 July in 1965, Bob Dylan, the American songwriter and singer sometimes, initially eschewed his acoustic guitar to go electric. The controversial performance is considered one of the most pivotal moments in the history of rock and roll, and that's the historical marker of the week. Grace Tran, you are a host with your husband Alex of a podcast called Let's Unpack That. Is that a travel pod about packing clothing and suitcases?
No, contrary to popular belief, it is not about a literal packing or unpacking. It really stems from we just noticed a lot of our own friends and ourselves too. We would be talking about certain subjects and then we just would run out of time to go deeper. And so, what we love to do is just go deeper in these subjects, figure out or explore just all the different nuances, and we call that just unpacking. Let's unpack these surface level subjects to go deeper.
Digging deep. You're like a
Yes.
Jacques Cousteau. You use terms in your podcast like small groups. That's a fairly in-house term, isn't it? Can you explain what those are and what advantage those have over large gatherings, if any?
So for anyone who's not familiar, like I don't know if you're, what religion you're with or what belief system you have, but this term small groups I feel like is very common in like the church, like Christian church space. And it really like changed my life to be just very frank. I in college was when I was introduced to this concept of a small group because, you hear about church, you hear like, oh, go on Sunday services or go to big gatherings. But it's very easy to just go in and out. Like nobody really has to know your name even. You could just slip in, slip out, and it's very anonymous. And I think actually our culture, we do tend to find some comfort in anonymity sometimes. But I firmly have I just believe and I personally experience just the life that comes out of when people actually know your name, they know your story, they know what's going on in your life, and you know theirs as well, and you just do life together in that way. My husband and I, we host a small group at our apartment every week. Currently, we're actually on a summer break, but typically we have it at our apartment. And yeah, it's just a great safe space for people to talk about real life struggles, questions, and pray for each other, encourage each other, enjoy good food, laugh, have games. And we've even connected people like in dating relationships together or roommate relationships, just lifelong relationships and friendships from these spaces.
One of the things that we learned during COVID is that people could attend a meeting, a large meeting, or I imagine you might have even had small groups on Zoom or something. You and I
Hmm.
meeting on Zoom for the first time. We've chatted on Facebook and such, but there's an anonymity to a Zoom meeting. You can go and you can hide your face, you can hide your name, you can name yourself Bill when your name is Susie. It doesn't really matter. So there's something that is, I think, useful in large gatherings where you can be anonymous. Consider someone who is not exactly on board yet with your religion, and you say
Hmm.
to a small group, they say, I don't know you people, I'm not sure if I can trust you, but I'm okay to come 5 minutes after the meeting begins, the large group, and I can leave 5 minutes before it ends, and no one, as you say, knows my name. and
Hmm.
and so that anonymity allows for investigation. But you're talking
Hmm.
about people who are already they've done their investigation and now they've concluded, and you want them to go deeper. Is that part of the
Hmm.
small group idea?
Yeah, typically, I think, I mean, everyone's different, so everyone's the kind of threshold, comfort threshold, just varies. But I have personally found, yeah, people who typically are interested in coming to just check out like a small group, they're not going in totally blind. They're, have questions first, what is this about? I don't want to join like a cult or some kind of, suspicious activity. And it typically just, I think that what is the determining factor or one of the biggest ones is the leader. Like if they trust that person, okay, they're not weird, they're not crazy, I talk to them at work, they're very friendly and genuinely welcoming. I think that sets like a really important tone. But in addition to that, I think a lot of people, whether or not you've experienced it before, we all kind of deeply inside of us know that there has to be more than just anonymity living. But I think in some shape or form, like we all at some point realize we need a consistent, smaller group of people to do life together with, whether it's, just three other friends or, five other people to keep accountable with. More and more, I'm noticing, not even just in the Christian, like church religious space, but I've seen even like gyms or other, self-improvement spaces. There's more cohorts, and these cohorts are pretty much like a model of the small group model that has worked for hundreds of years now, where people just get together regularly, they're consistent, they commit to each other, and they commit to growing with each other and helping each other grow.
You used to live for some time in Australia. What prompted
Yeah.
what prompted your departure?
Oh man, that is that was very tricky, very hard for me to do. Before we were recording, I was just reminiscing on Sydney and how much I loved Australia. I still haven't been back since COVID. I need to book that ticket, but yeah, I really loved being in Australia. So it was very hard for me basically to make a decision about a future potential relationship that I was in. So I was in a long distance relationship. I actually moved to Australia single, met met this guy on a Facebook group unintentionally. The Facebook group had nothing to do with dating or relationships, though we just met in the comment section. Started talking regularly over Facebook, and then eventually on video calls. And so that blossomed into a long distance relationship when he actually flew over from Southern California to meet me in Sydney without ever have said he's never been to Australia. He doesn't know a single person there. Instead, what happened was I applied to some positions internally at my company. Back then, I was working at Google. At the same time, the guy I was dating, I'll just spoil it for you guys, he's now my husband. Um, he actually found a job. Somebody offered him a job to this company without him ever applying for it. That was in the Bay Area, and the Bay Area is actually where I'm from. I actually had a door open internally at my company to also move to the Bay Area. So it was like the paths converged. But thankfully, everything I made that leap. I left it behind, and thankfully, fast forward to now, we've been married almost 3 years.
You've got time to unpack things.
Yes.
Until you've monetized them significantly, I'm guessing you also have other jobs. What about your job makes you get up in the morning, even Monday morning?
Yeah. So that's an interesting question because I actually currently don't have a full-time job besides, the full-time content creation that we're doing. We're actually in the building stages right now of launching an online business. Well, on the side, I actually do some like ghostwriting. I actually do that for some pastors, some executives, and on the side, or during my main week, majority of my time I spend doing this content creation and building systems and operations so that we are set up for our online business, which is related to helping people through coaching services, consulting services, and my husband Alex right now, he's actually in the process of becoming a coach, a life coach.
On your Christmas card podcast at the end of last year, you said, "We want to know what you've learned. What has God taught you?" I want to ask, can people learn without God being involved, or is all learning from heaven itself?
Ooh, I like this question. It's very philosophical because I'll say this. Like, if you zoom out, I think regardless of what you believe, what religion you ascribe to, yes, every person can learn, right? I'm not going to be here saying you have to believe in God to learn. I think there's always lessons you can glean from any experience, just depending on your perspective. I will say, though, I haven't thought it too deep about this, so I'll have to marinate more on this. But just off the cuff, I really do believe, though, like all the lessons that we learn are inspired, are led by God, whether or not you know it.
My daughter and her husband used to live in the Bay Area until COVID lockdown, and they decided they wanted to get closer to her sister, our other daughter, and away from the crazy prices of rent and other expenses there in San Francisco. You live there. Do you think you'll
Mhm.
away one day?
That's a very timely question. I was literally just telling my friend yesterday because she was trying to get me to tell her my life plans to plan around her wedding. And I literally told her I have no idea. Like my future plans right now, for me and my husband, we are kind of going back again to what I was saying about, how when I was in Australia, how are we going to close the gap? Like, what's going to happen logistically, when and where, and just all these questions. We're literally experiencing that. It's been that was in 2018, so yeah, about 5 years now. 5 years later, we're experiencing that same questioning um in a new way. Yeah, we'll see where we end up, but I'm not surprised. I think a lot of people, especially due to COVID, moved out of the Bay Area, and it was a very, very difficult time here, especially with all the laws and changing policies that we had in this county.
Hey, Grace,
Yes.
is there anything else you want to tell the Bob's Your Uncle podcast international family?
Yeah, I guess just the last thing. I mean, there's a lot I feel like we covered, but I just want to kind of reemphasize. I loved your question, Bob, about why, like, where is God? Like, is God actually inspiring all of this, or is he not? And do you have to believe in God? Like, these are really, really valid questions. And I would just encourage anyone with these questions to just explore that more. I think that's the whole premise of what inspired me and my husband to start a podcast is we know that life is not black and white. Things are not just A or B very clear. There's a lot of gray areas, a lot of nuances, and I think that's what I would encourage anybody to just continue tugging on those strings, leaning into exploring the gray areas of life, and to actually seek out people like genuine believers or genuine people who practice their faith and practice their religion, whatever religion it might be. I encourage you to explore different religions and kind of figure out for yourself like what is true. God wants an authentic faith. Like, he wants us to choose him, not out of obligation or pressure, but because we genuinely want to. So yeah, I would just encourage anybody, if you're curious, you can listen to our podcast. Again, it's called Let's Unpack That with Alex and Grace. And we talk about how that is very true in our own lives as believers, as people who, wrestle with all these tensions in everyday life.
So thanks so much for being on the podcast. I pray God's blessings on you as you continue, but long into the future. May it be to his pleasure and for his purposes. So it's a real pleasure. Thanks so much, Grace. Have a great rest of the summer.
Thank you. You too.
What do you think about all this? Write me on bobmendo@aol.com, or comment or even video to me on Instagram or Twitter at BobsYourUnclePC. I'd love to know what you think about all this. Don't forget to post a review on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you're getting your podcasts. And also, don't forget to subscribe. Every week we read from the #1 bestseller of all time, the Bible. And this week is no different. King David said in Psalm 143, "Teach me to do your will, for you are my God. Let your good spirit lead me on level ground." I hope you'll join me next week when I interview Ruth Hovsepian of Montreal, Canada, a preacher's kid, a gal who's lost tons of weight and has story after story to tell. This is going to be a good one. Until then, when things seem bleak or uncertain, look up to God. He's in his heaven, and Bob's your uncle. Shalom from Sydney.